The Latin verbal system is a thing of beauty. There are rules and patterns that structure almost the entire verbal system. You can describe in abstract terms how to form the perfects and the passives of the perfects, and it all is very nice and systematic. It's one of the better languages in those terms. The perfect subjunctive doesn't make any sense. That is, you couldn't predict what form the perfect subjunctive is going to be based on knowing the present subjunctive, the pluperfect subjunctive, the imperfect subjunctive. The perfect subjunctive is the weird one. So, just to remind you, the present subjunctive is your E, A, E switch, right? We fear, I don't remember how you learned this, but we fear fat fryers is what they taught me when I was in undergrad. You switch E vowels to A vowels and A vowels to E vowels. That's not how the perfect subjunctive works. The imperfect subjunctive is adding endings onto what looks like the infinitive. The deep magic is actually different. That's not actually what's happening. But in terms of like recognizing it, you can think of this as taking the infinitive and adding endings. And while we're there, let's note that the imperfect and the pluperfect subjunctive, the two past time subjunctives, they're part of the, I'm being specific here because remember tense is time plus aspect, so the two past time subjunctives, the imperfect and the pluperfect, are extremely predictable. They make perfect sense. So you take your perfect infinitive right here. Oh, I'm too low. Right here. You take your perfect infinitive and you add on endings to get your pluperfect subjunctive. Very easy. So laudovice, laudovisem, laudovices, laudoviset. Very straightforward. And that'll be the subjunctive mood of the pluperfect tense. We'll see the most common use cases for that at the end of this chapter. Things in sequence of tenses, subordinate clauses. I suppose an independent use of this would be something like he would that he praised, or something like that. He would have praised. He would have had praised. I missed a word. He would have had praised. Pluperfect subjunctive. Something like that. More often, this is going to show up in subordinate clauses. Okay, so we the past tense subjunctives, simple. What's going on with the perfect subjunctive? Well, unpredictable. It is going to use the same forms morphologically. So that's how you're shaping it. Morph meaning like form, shape. In terms of spelling, it's going to be indistinguishable, pretty much, indistinguishable from the future perfect. And the future perfect makes perfect sense. Very clear. The future perfect, you take your stem from the third principal part and you smush into that the form of to be, right? That's generally how you form these perfect actives. So erim, eris, erit, actually it should be arrow, but ero, eris, erit, arimus, eritis, erint are your he will be, we will be, y'all will be, they will be, pretty much. That to be verb smushed into your third principal part stem, which is the one that usually ends with a V, except when it doesn't. So very simple. And the thing is that the future perfect and the perfect subjunctive, this is the top line to memorize, are indistinguishable. They're the same. Pretty much. You'll see there's a few little differences. The first person singular. Tiny difference. There are some extra macrons. You can go compare those things. Macrons aren't printed in most editions. They're definitely not in most manuscripts. I would not, in the terms of which macrons are important to remember, these rank pretty low. So hopefully that is straightforward. The passives are totally predictable. They're exactly what you would expect. You're going to be taking your fourth principal part, and you're going to be adding, not smushing, like you do with the perfect active system, but adding as a separate word the verb of to be And since we're subjunctive, we want to use the subjunctive form of to be. Sim, sis, sit, simus, sitis, sint. So that's hopefully very recognizable. You're going to take your what looks like your perfect passive participle and the verb to be, and together they will create your perfect subjunctive passive and pluperfect subjunctive passive. And you may not have thought a lot about what would be the subjunctive, the imperfect subjunctive of the verb to be, but it's formed like all the other ones. You take the infinitive, here, esse, and add endings, sm, ss, esset. So that is right here. Esse to be, here we have sm, ss, esset, esmus, estus, essent. So, look at those forms. Think about how they fit into the pattern. In class, we can put the big pattern on the board. And think about what those things mean. I find this little chart quite helpful. I would just go through and translate these. He is leading, he will lead, he was leading, he led, he will have led, he had led, something like that, and then go through the subjunctives. And the subjunctive is going to be a little artificial because it's going to be an independent subjunctive, which is not the most common kind of subjunctive, but still worth going through and looking at it and thinking about what form this is and how do I recognize it as that form. Indirect questions, like indirect statements, are when you are reporting that a question was asked without asking the question again. So I can say, Steve asked, what's for lunch? Or I could say, that this is actually a little ambiguous. Steve asked what lunch is. There we go. That nailed it. Steve asked what's for lunch. So I'm quoting his question, because Steve came up and said, what's for lunch? But I could not quote the question, but report the question. Steve asked what lunch is. In Latin, you are going to use a subjunctive for that. And how this is mostly useful is when you are translating this from Latin to English, you're going to see, in an instance like this one, rogant quid Gaius faciat, you're going to see this subjunctive, and you're not going to translate this would, should, couldy, right? You're not going to translate this as, you're not going to play up the subjunctiveness. No, it's subjunctive because it's in an indirect question, which means you need to regularize it to the indicative. So they asked what Gaius is doing, is how you translate that. Not they asked, what should Gaius do? See, hear the difference? You might be tempted to translate it subjunctively. What would Gaius do? What could, I don't know, something like that. Don't. It's an indirect question. You treat it like it was indicative in English. They asked what Gaius is doing, what Gaius did, what Gaius will do. Note here we have a periphrastic construction. Periphrastic, big fancy word, kind of scary. Sometimes it's used in particular ways in Latin grammars that are more specific, but what it actually just means is talking around something. So it's any way of using multiple words to do what you might imagine one word could do. So there is, in this case, no future subjunctive. That doesn't exist. So what if you want to report a question that was asked about the future? Gaius comes up and someone comes up, a bunch of people come up and ask, what is Gaius going to do? How do you report that question without a future subjunctive? You create one by combining some other things, by combining the future active participle, facturus, with the subjunctive verb to be, sit. That form doesn't exist as an independent form, but we could imagine that it might exist. You could go, and so we call this a periphrastic because we're using multiple words to do the work that would otherwise be done with a single word. Usually because the form doesn't exist. Sometimes you do it just for other reasons, style. Sequence of tenses is not all that intimidating. It is mostly about recognizing why is this in this tense. And it is when you have subordinate clauses, you are going to use this primary and historical correspond pretty much to present and future and past. That basically works. And there's a little bit of fuzziness with the perfect tense. But present and future verbs are going to take present and perfect verbs in their subordinate clauses. And in the subordinate clauses, the work the present and the perfect are doing, you can think about it as just communicating the aspect of those things. That the time parts drops out, present is ongoing, so it's going to be at the same time or after the main verb, and the perfect is complete. Perfect, that means complete, which means the perfect in the subordinate clause is going to be referred to the things that happen before the main verb. Look at the examples here. The same work is going to be done with the past tense. When you have a past tense in the main verb, you're not going to see a pluperfect main verb, he had walked to the store, followed by because, and then something in the present tense. That just isn't going to happen, pretty much. So you take, when you have a pluperfect in your main, as your main verb, you're going to get either an imperfect in the subordinate, which is, again, think about just the aspect. It's either contemporary action, ongoing action, or future action, or you're going to get a pluperfect, indicating that the thing happened before the thing in the main verb. So it uses the aspect of the verb in the subordinate clause to communicate relative time, that is, time relative to the main verb. Again, look at the examples of this. This is actually a very nice presentation of the examples. Think through what's going on with the use of the aspect of the subordinate verb, the one after quid, to communicate time relative to the primary verb, here, rogant, rogabunt, rogawerunt, and rogabant. The time that this verb in the subordinate clause, its aspect, is telling you whether it's contemporary with, potentially future, future with respect to this main verb, or preceding that main verb. That's all sequence of tenses are. And the basic idea is if you're using something present or future, you're going to use the present or the perfect, which are both present time verbs. I know that's not how we usually think about the perfect, but they're both present time, complete and incomplete. That's the thing that actually matters. And then if you're using a past tense verb as your main verb, you're going to use a past time subordinate. Hope that is helpful. It's not a replacement for reading the textbook, obviously, but I hope that sort of guides you through and articulates things in a slightly different way that you can pause, rewind, play at double speed if you find it boring. I will see you all very soon.